The night was silent in Ephesus, but it was not peaceful. The wind barely moved. The great columns of the Temple of Artemis, one of the wonders of the ancient world, stood tall against the dark sky, glowing faintly under torchlight. Priests whispered hymns as they walked between marble pillars, touching the cold stone as if touching the goddess herself. In this sacred place, people believed no blood could ever be spilled. It was a law older than empires. Whoever reached the sanctuary of Artemis was safe. No king could drag you out. No soldier could harm you. No anger, no revenge, no political threat could cross the borders of the holy ground. For centuries, this promise had been believed. But on this night in 41 BCE, that promise would be broken, and the person waiting inside the sanctuary, protected by secret law, was a woman whose name had once made Egypt tremble. Her name was Arsinoe, Arsinoe IV, princess of the Ptolemaic bloodline, daughter of a king, sister of Cleopatra VII, queen of Egypt and lover of Rome's most powerful men. But now Arsinoe was only a fugitive. She had no army, no throne, no money, only the cold stone steps of the Artemis temple beneath her, and a hope that the goddess would shelter her from the world that wanted her dead. Yet outside the sanctuary walls, Rome had arrived. For hours, the people of Ephesus heard the sounds of soldiers gathering. Armor hit armor, hoofs cracked against stone. Roman voices filled the streets, sharp, commanding, impatient. The citizens, fearful, closed their doors and hid behind shutters. Everyone understood that a storm had come, but nobody knew how violent it would be. The first shouts came just after midnight. Dogs barked, torches flared, the city shook with footsteps. A man in a dark cloak approached the temple gates. His face was lit by the trembling light of a torch. Behind him marched Roman soldiers in tight formation. Their weapons gleamed as if hungry for action. The man raised a hand, and the soldiers stopped. The priests inside the temple heard the voice of the commander echo through the sacred courtyard. "By order of Marcus Antonius, representative of Rome, open these gates. Deliver to us the woman named Arsinoe." The priests froze. Their hearts pounded. Never in their lifetimes had a Roman dared to give orders at the threshold of Artemis's sanctuary. One of the older priests stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Sir, no one may enter this holy ground with weapons. The sanctuary protects all who seek refuge. This is sacred law." The commander did not blink. That law no longer applies. Inside the temple, Arsinoe heard everything. She had been sitting by Artemis's altar, resting her head against the cold stone, feeling the weight of her past pressing against her like a mountain. She had run from Alexandria, run from armies, run from betrayal, only to find herself cornered again. She stood slowly, her breath trembling. Her eyes were bright but tired. She had been a queen once, even if only briefly. She had commanded troops. She had spoken before crowds. She had seen the Nile rise and fall. But now she felt small, like a shadow of her former self. Still, she carried something inside her that no executioner could remove. The memory of what she had survived. As the temple trembled with Roman voices, she whispered to herself, "So, my sister has found me at last." Because Arsinoe knew the truth. Marcus Antony, the man the world called Antony, would never do this on his own. Not like this, not in such a holy place. This order came from Cleopatra, the gilded queen in Alexandria, beloved of Julius Caesar and now lover of Antony, wanted her younger sister erased from history. Cleopatra ruled Egypt through charm, brilliance, and political fire. She had survived rebellions, Roman generals, palace conspiracies. She knew how dangerous a rival could be, especially a rival who shared her blood. Arsinoe had once challenged Cleopatra's claim to the throne. She had led armies in the Alexandrian War. She had forced Caesar himself into deadly street battles. For a moment, she had even won. It was a memory Cleopatra would never forget. And Cleopatra forgave nothing. So now Antony, under the influence of Cleopatra, had sent men to do the unthinkable, break into the most sacred temple in Asia Minor and seize the woman who had become a living threat to Egypt's queen. Arsinoe closed her eyes. The chanting outside grew louder. The goddess Artemis had protected generations. Would she protect her now? The soldiers pushed against the gates. The priests cried out, blocking the doorway with their bodies, each one terrified but unwilling to break the ancient laws. They shouted prayers to Artemis, begging her to shield the sanctuary. But Rome did not fear gods of other lands. Steel hit wood, the doors shook, shouts rose in the night air. A crash rang through the temple. The sacred gates broke. Torches spilled light into the darkness. Roman soldiers entered, their armor clattering, their swords drawn. The priests backed away in horror. One of the soldiers pointed toward the inner sanctuary. "There, that is her!" Arsinoe stood alone before Artemis's altar. She did not run. She did not scream. She looked at the soldiers with a strange calm, as if she had already foreseen this moment many nights before. The men surrounded her. She lifted her chin, refusing to bow. For a heartbeat, the temple seemed to hold its breath. "By order of Marcus Antonius, you are condemned." Arsinoe's voice was soft but steady. "Then Antony fears me more than he admits." Her words struck the soldiers like cold water. For an instant, even the commander hesitated. Here stood a woman who had once made Julius Caesar himself struggle for survival. A woman who had been crowned by the people of Alexandria. A woman whose blood was royal, whose ancestry traced back to the companions of Alexander the Great. Yet now she was helpless. The soldiers grabbed her wrists, dragging her out of the sanctuary. Her footsteps left faint marks in the dust on the temple floor, a final trace of her presence. The priests wailed. Some fell to their knees. Others covered their faces, unable to watch the sacrilege. As Arsinoe crossed the boundary of the sanctuary, she whispered one last prayer to Artemis, not for safety, but for clarity. Let history remember what happened here, because she knew something deep and terrible. When a powerful woman is erased, the world loses more than a life. It loses a truth. And on this night, the world was about to lose hers. The soldiers dragged her into the cold street. Torches surrounded her. Shadows danced against the walls of Ephesus. In the distance, the first hints of dawn touched the horizon. Arsinoe looked toward the rising light and took a deep breath. If she could not survive, then she would at least face death as a queen. And so began the final journey of Arsinoe IV, Princess of Egypt. A woman's story was nearly destroyed, whose memory was almost wiped clean by the hands of her own sister, and whose death would shake the ancient world. Her execution was not merely a killing. It was a message, a warning, a political strike, a violation of gods and law. And it set the stage for a deeper story, a story of rivalry, of power, of love turned into weapon, and how Cleopatra and Antony built an alliance heavy with secrets, fear, and hidden goals. But to understand why Arsinoe died that night, we must go back to Alexandria, back to the Ptolemaic palace, back to the beginning of a sisterhood broken by ambition. Before this world-shaking night, there was another story, a story of two sisters born to rule and doomed to destroy each other.
Long before the terrible night at Ephesus, long before soldiers dragged Arsinoe out of the sanctuary, two little girls walked the shining halls of the Ptolemaic palace in Alexandria. Two sisters, two futures, two destinies that would one day collide like storms. Their names were Cleopatra and Arsinoe, and though they shared the same blood, the same air, the same palace, they carried two very different kinds of fire inside them. The Ptolemaic palace in Alexandria was built to overwhelm the senses. Its floors shone like water. Its walls were covered with bright colors, blue like the sea, gold like the sun, red like the desert sand. Marble statues lined the corridors. Servants hurried through the halls carrying scrolls, perfumes, baskets of fruit. Rumors said that even the air inside the palace was sweetened with crushed petals. But behind all this beauty was something cold and hard: fear. To be born a Ptolemy was to be born into danger. Their family history was soaked with blood. Brothers fought sisters, sisters fought brothers. Husbands married sisters and then ordered their deaths. Uncles poisoned nephews. Queens killed their rivals by sending them to accidental drownings or mysterious illnesses. The throne of Egypt was not inherited. It was won. It was fought for. It was defended with daggers in the dark and armies in the daylight. Cleopatra and Arsinoe grew up knowing this. They learned to smile carefully, to watch everyone, to hide their fears, to speak like adults even when they were still children. But each sister responded to this dangerous world in her own way. Cleopatra was the brightest flame in the palace, bold, quick-minded, sharp as a blade. She studied languages until she could speak to anyone: Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, scholars from lands beyond the Nile. People said she could charm a stone into speaking back. Even as a girl, when she entered a room, adults noticed her. She learned to read people's expressions. She learned to guide conversations. She learned how power moved, how rumors spread, how alliances formed. And she learned something else. Charm was a weapon. Words were armor. Beauty could open doors that armies could not. Cleopatra understood the world early. Arsinoe understood it differently. Arsinoe was quieter, more observant. She did not command attention the way Cleopatra did, but she noticed everything. She watched people's hands when they spoke. She memorized the paths servants took when they carried messages. She learned the moods of her father simply by hearing his footsteps in the hall. She was not loud, but she was not weak. Inside her lived a stubborn strength, like a flame protected by glass, small but steady. She asked questions others were afraid to ask. Why must siblings fight? Why couldn't power be shared? Why was the throne of Egypt worth so many graves? And she saw something that Cleopatra never truly saw. Being royalty did not mean you were free. It meant you were surrounded by invisible chains. Cleopatra broke those chains by controlling everyone around her. Arsinoe tried to escape them by understanding the world beneath power, how people lived, how cities breathed, how soldiers thought. They were both intelligent, both ambitious, both destined for something great. But destiny is cruel. It does not allow two rising suns in the same sky. Their father, Ptolemy XIII, was a man who ruled Egypt but feared Rome. He spent more time pleasing Roman senators than managing his own kingdom. Sometimes he was present and loving. Other times he was distant, lost in politics and trouble. The palace was filled with whispers. Rome keeps him on the throne. Without Roman friends, he is nothing. He fears his own people. Cleopatra listened. She learned something important. If Egypt wanted to survive, its ruler needed Roman allies, powerful ones. Arsinoe listened too, but she learned something different. If Egypt depended on Rome, then Egypt was no longer truly Egypt. These two ideas, Cleopatra's desire for alliance, Arsinoe's desire for independence, were seeds that would one day grow into deadly conflict. But in those early years, the sisters still walked together through gardens, still shared tutors, still played in the palace courtyards. The world had not yet set them on opposite sides. Not yet. The turning point came slowly, like shadows creeping across the floor. Their father grew sick. His rule weakened. Egypt's treasury emptied. Enemies inside the palace whispered about replacing him. The Romans demanded more money in exchange for friendship. Cleopatra stayed close to her father during this time. She studied his meetings. She read his letters. She learned how he negotiated, how he begged Rome for support, how he managed rivals by pretending to be weaker than he was. Arsinoe, meanwhile, spent more time with the younger servants and guards. They told her stories of starving villages, corrupt officials, and riots in the streets. Cleopatra learned how to rule the palace. Arsinoe learned how the palace ruled the people. Two different worlds, two different teachers, two different paths. When their father finally died, the palace cracked open like a fragile shell. The throne did not pass peacefully. Cleopatra, the eldest daughter, claimed her right to rule. Ptolemy XIII, their younger brother, claimed it too, supported by advisors who feared Cleopatra's intelligence. Arsinoe watched from the shadows, seeing allies form and betray each other in the same week. She saw soldiers choose sides, saw gold pass secretly from hand to hand, saw letters from Rome arriving almost daily, shaping every decision. And she saw something else. Cleopatra intended to share power, not with her brother, not with anyone. But Egypt's tradition demanded co-rulers, usually a brother and sister married to each other. The young Ptolemy XIII had powerful supporters. Cleopatra's influence was growing, but her enemies were gathering. The palace was preparing for war, and she could feel it in the air. One night, while the sisters were in the library, Cleopatra looked at Arsinoe with steady eyes and said, "Only one of us will survive this world." Arsinoe whispered, "Why must it be that way?" But Cleopatra did not answer, because she already knew the truth, because she had already decided what she would become. Not long after, the first real battle began. Not with armies, but with words, alliances, and political traps. Cleopatra left Alexandria briefly, using charm and intelligence to win powerful Roman friends. When she returned, she came not as a fleeing princess, but as a rising queen with foreign support behind her. Her brother's advisors panicked. Tensions exploded. Suddenly, Alexandria was a city split in two. Streets filled with armed men. Rumors spread like wildfire. Every corner of the palace became dangerous. Arsinoe had a choice: side with Cleopatra or side with those who feared Cleopatra's growing power. And for the first time in her life, she looked at her sister not with affection, but with fear. Cleopatra was brilliant, but brilliance can cast dark shadows. Arsinoe chose survival. She joined the faction that opposed Cleopatra, led by her brother's powerful advisors. She became a symbol, a rallying point for those who believed Cleopatra was becoming too strong, too Roman, too willing to sacrifice Egypt's independence. It was a choice that would shape the rest of her life, a choice that would one day lead her to a temple in Ephesus, a choice that would mark her as a target, a choice her sister would never forgive. The sisters who once shared tutors, gardens, and childhood whispers were now walking on opposite sides of a battlefield. Cleopatra fought for the throne with charm, strategy, and political brilliance. Arsinoe fought for survival, for a voice, for a future where she was not just someone else's shadow. Two sisters, two visions, two destinies pulling them apart, and the world around them was about to explode, because the next person to walk into this family conflict was a Roman general whose name would echo through history, a man who would change everything.
His name was Julius Caesar, and when he arrived in Alexandria, he brought fire into a palace already filled with dry straw. Soon the sisters would discover that the storm inside Egypt was nothing compared to the storm about to come from Rome.
Alexandria had seen many powerful men walk its streets. Kings from the east, generals from Greece, merchants from all corners of the sea. But none carried a shadow as long as the one cast by Julius Caesar. He arrived in the city in 48 BCE, not as a peaceful visitor, but as a man fleeing war. Rome was burning with civil conflict. Pompey, Caesar's great rival, had run to Egypt seeking protection. The young King Ptolemy XIII, Cleopatra and Arsinoe's brother, had received Pompey with promises, then ordered his murder. The moment Caesar stepped foot in Alexandria and saw Pompey's severed head, the world shifted. Caesar did not smile. He did not thank the king. He did not celebrate the gift. He stared at the bloody trophy with cold eyes and whispered, "This was not your right." The message was clear. Rome chooses its own enemies. Rome decides who lives or dies, not Egypt. And from that moment, Caesar believed he had the right to fix the Ptolemaic family. What he wanted was simple: a stable Egypt ruled by someone loyal to Rome. But the Ptolemies were never simple. Caesar set up camp inside the royal palace without asking permission. Alexandria was shocked, but they dared not oppose him. He summoned all members of the royal family to explain the succession crisis. Cleopatra seized this moment. She knew Caesar's reputation. She knew he loved power. She knew he admired intelligence, and she believed she could win him. She was right. In a moment that became legend, Cleopatra secretly entered the palace wrapped in a carpet or perhaps a linen sack, and was carried straight into Caesar's private quarters. When the cloth was unrolled, Caesar saw a young queen with shining eyes and a confident smile. Everything changed. The two spoke for hours. Cleopatra impressed him with her languages, her political understanding, and her boldness. Caesar admired boldness. He admired charm. He admired ambition. And Cleopatra was ambition itself. By the next morning, they were allies. By the next week, they were lovers. And by the next month, Caesar announced that Cleopatra, and not her brother's faction, should rule Egypt. This declaration struck Alexandria like lightning, because the city was not only full of Cleopatra's supporters, it was full of people who feared her. Among them stood the young princess Arsinoe. Arsinoe watched the situation with growing fear. Caesar was not here to help Egypt. Caesar was here to control it. And Cleopatra had placed herself on his side with terrifying speed. In one night, political balance shattered. Ptolemy XIII's advisors panicked. They believed Caesar would kill the boy king or force him to obey Cleopatra. They believed the Romans cared nothing for Egypt's traditions. So they made a choice. If Cleopatra and Caesar wanted the palace, then they would take the city. And suddenly Alexandria became a battlefield. Streets filled with soldiers, shouts echoed between buildings, smoke rose in the distance, the harbor filled with Roman ships. The civil war between Cleopatra and her brother was no longer a family fight. It had become a war between Alexandria and Rome. And in the middle of this chaos stood Arsinoe, a young princess with no army, no allies of her own, and no idea which side would keep her alive. She was barely 15 years old, yet she was about to be forced into a role far larger than her age. Ptolemy XIII's generals saw Arsinoe's youth as useful. A young princess could be turned into a symbol. A symbol could become a rallying cry, and a rallying cry could unite a desperate city. So they approached her with sweet words. "Your people love you. You must lead them. You are the hope of Egypt. Only you can save us." Arsinoe hesitated. She was not like Cleopatra, who ran toward power like a dancer running toward applause. Arsinoe had never wanted to rule. But she did want to live. She did want Egypt to be free. She did want her people to stop suffering under foreign control. And above all, she feared becoming a puppet in Cleopatra's world. So she agreed. She allowed herself to be named queen by the anti-Cleopatra faction. She stood beside generals as they promised victory. She watched crowds cheer her name. She watched young men raise their weapons for her. But Arsinoe also saw something darker. When crowds cheer a queen, they also demand a queen to blame if things go wrong. And things were about to go very wrong. Caesar moved with speed that stunned Alexandria. His disciplined Roman forces clashed with the city's defenders in narrow streets filled with smoke and broken stone. Cleopatra's supporters handed him supplies and information. Caesar ordered the palace secured and began planning to crush the rebellion. Arsinoe was trapped inside a political storm she never wanted to command. She followed her generals through war rooms. She attended strategy meetings she barely understood. She stood on the city walls watching flames rise where homes once stood. She could feel it in her bones. The city could not win. But the generals refused to surrender. They claimed victory was close. They blamed every setback on Cleopatra's tricks. They used Arsinoe's name as a banner. "Fight for Queen Arsinoe. Fight against the Roman invader." Arsinoe felt a bitter truth growing inside her. She was not a queen. She was a shield, a symbol, a tool, and people were dying for a symbol. As the fighting intensified, Arsinoe made a desperate decision. She fled the palace with her closest supporters and joined the city's main army at the front lines. She was terrified. Her hands trembled. Her heart raced. But she refused to hide while others risked their lives. When soldiers saw her walking through rows of tents and wounded men, they whispered, "She is brave. She is not like Cleopatra. She stands with us." For a moment, Arsinoe felt something powerful. Something Cleopatra had always felt, the love of a crowd, the energy of a people who believe in you. But moments like that do not last long in war. Caesar launched a massive attack on the city's defenses. His engineers built siege machines. His soldiers cut off supplies. The harbor filled with Roman fire. One by one, the city's defenses collapsed. Arsinoe's generals argued. Some wanted to flee. Some wanted to negotiate. Some wanted to fight to the death. Arsinoe saw the truth. They had lost. And she knew what Caesar did to those who opposed him. So she made another desperate choice. She surrendered. Not just for herself, but to stop the dying, to save the young soldiers who still believed in her. And so the young princess who had never wanted to be queen was captured and paraded before Caesar like a prize of war. Many expected he would execute her. He did not. Instead, he spared her, sending her into exile far from Egypt, far from Cleopatra, far from the palace where everything began. Her new home would be the sanctuary of Artemis in Ephesus, a holy place, a safe place, a place where even the most powerful men in the world were expected to obey sacred law. For a time, Arsinoe believed she could start again. But Cleopatra had not forgotten her, and Cleopatra does not forgive. And so years later, when Antony rose in power and joined Cleopatra's world, the old fear returned. The sanctuary at Ephesus was holy. But to men like Antony and to women like Cleopatra, holiness was just another obstacle to break. And the girl who once tried to save Alexandria would face her final danger, the danger that ended with Roman soldiers breaking sacred doors, the danger that ended with her execution. But before that tragic night, before her death, something else happened, something that revealed the deeper rivalry that shaped her fate, the rise of Antony and the beginning of Cleopatra's greatest political game.
The world changed again in 44 BCE. Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome, was murdered, stabbed again and again by men he once called friends. His blood stained the floor of the Senate, and his death ripped apart the Roman Republic. When the news reached Egypt, Cleopatra did not cry. She understood something most people did not. When a giant falls, the wind he creates can lift another into the sky. And that another was Marcus Antony, known to the world as Mark Antony. Mark Antony was everything Caesar was not. Where Caesar was cold and calculating, Antony was fiery, loud, and emotional. Where Caesar preferred control, Antony preferred celebration. Where Caesar planned every step, Antony trusted his instincts. But do not be fooled. Antony was not a fool. Behind the loud laughter, the drinking, the bold displays of confidence, there lived a man who understood power just as deeply as Caesar did. He understood loyalty, fear, desire, and, most importantly, how to make men follow him. And after Caesar's death, Antony rose quickly. He spoke at Caesar's funeral, lifting Caesar's bloody robe for the crowd to see. He shouted that Caesar had loved Rome, that his killers were traitors, that his death demanded justice. The people screamed with anger. The city burned in chaos. From that day forward, Antony was no longer just a friend of Caesar. He became Caesar's avenger, and Cleopatra knew exactly what that meant. While Rome fell into civil war once again, Cleopatra watched from Alexandria. She had a son with Caesar, little Caesarion. She believed her son had a claim to Rome's future, but she also knew that Rome would decide his fate, not Egypt. So she waited. She listened. She studied every rumor. And then Antony sent a message. "Queen Cleopatra, meet me in Tarsus." Cleopatra smiled. She knew Antony wanted something. He wanted Egypt's wealth. He wanted political support. He wanted allies for the war he was preparing to fight. But Cleopatra also knew something even more valuable. She could give Antony what no one else could. Not gold, not ships, not soldiers. She could give him a dream of empire, a dream of Eastern glory, a dream of ruling like Alexander the Great. So she prepared her entrance.
When Cleopatra sailed into Tarsus, she did not come quietly. She came the way a goddess might visit the earth. Her ship shone with gold, its purple sails catching the wind. Musicians played soft music. Incense drifted over the water. She sat on a throne dressed as Aphrodite, the goddess of love. And when Antony saw her, something inside him cracked open. He did not see a queen. He saw a legend. Cleopatra's charm wrapped around him like a soft but unbreakable thread. Her voice was warm, her confidence powerful. She spoke to Antony like an equal, not like a Roman general. She praised his bravery. She admired his strength. She fed his pride gently but cleverly. Within days, Antony was hers. Within weeks, he followed her to Alexandria. Within months, they ruled together as if the entire East belonged to them. But there was a shadow behind Cleopatra's smile, a shadow named Arsinoe. Antony wanted to reshape the East. Cleopatra wanted to reshape her past. And Arsinoe, living quietly in the sanctuary of Artemis, was a piece of that past Cleopatra desperately wanted erased. Why? Because Arsinoe represented three things Cleopatra could not tolerate. 1. A rival claim to the throne. Even though Arsinoe was in exile, some cities still remembered her as the young queen who resisted Rome. 2. A symbol of rebellion. Her survival proved that Caesar once showed mercy to Cleopatra's enemy. 3. A story Cleopatra could not control. Arsinoe's escape from Alexandria embarrassed Cleopatra politically. Some whispered that Arsinoe was the real victim of the family conflict. Cleopatra could not risk these whispers spreading, so she waited until she had the right partner, the right hammer to smash the last piece of her old world. And that hammer was Antony. Antony followed Cleopatra back to Egypt, and the two spent months in Alexandria planning the future. They held long feasts, wore gold crowns, and acted not like Roman leaders, but like Eastern monarchs. But Antony also heard things he did not like. He heard that some coins in the Aegean still carried Arsinoe's name. He heard that some Greek cities still prayed for her safety. He heard that some Egyptian families whispered that Arsinoe, not Cleopatra, was the rightful queen. At first, Antony ignored these rumors, but Cleopatra did not. She fed Antony small pieces of the truth. Arsinoe is dangerous. Arsinoe still claims the throne. Arsinoe could be used by your enemies. Arsinoe would never forgive you if she gained power. Day after day, drop after drop, the idea soaked into Antony's mind. Soon he began to think the idea was his own. He began to believe that eliminating Arsinoe was a political necessity. Then came the final push. A Roman messenger brought news. Arsinoe had been seen near the gates of the Artemisian sanctuary. Some followers still greeted her. Some locals still brought her food. Some passing traders still bowed to her. Antony's face darkened. A princess living quietly was no problem. A princess gathering attention was. And Cleopatra leaned close and whispered the sentence that sealed Arsinoe's fate. If you want the East to follow you, remove the last piece of the past. But there was one problem. Arsinoe lived inside the sacred zone of Artemis, a place protected by ancient law, a place even kings would not enter, a place Rome itself had respected for centuries. To touch anyone within the sanctuary was to break holy law. To kill anyone in the sanctuary was a sin that echoed through the world. Antony knew this. Cleopatra knew this. But power does not respect walls made of holiness. Power does not obey old laws. Power creates new laws. And Antony believed his war for Rome's future was greater than the rules of old Greek gods. So he gave the order. Soldiers were sent. The sanctuary was surrounded. Priests were dragged aside. The holy doors were broken open. Arsinoe, once a frightened girl, then a symbol of resistance, was dragged outside, crying and begging the goddess for protection. But the goddess was silent. Antony had chosen politics over piety. Cleopatra had chosen ambition over sisterhood, and the soldiers obeyed their command. Arsinoe was executed beneath the open sky, killed in a place where no blood was supposed to fall, killed in a moment that shocked even the ancient world, killed because Cleopatra wanted the past erased, killed because Antony wanted to prove his loyalty. Her body lay in the dust. The sanctuary fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. And in that silence, something changed. The people who witnessed the act understood that Rome had crossed a line that should never be crossed, and the gods, they believed, never forget such things. The execution of Arsinoe did not only destroy a young woman's life, it destroyed something larger. It destroyed trust. It destroyed Rome's image. It destroyed the old boundaries between holy and political. And it began a chain of events that would lead Antony and Cleopatra to their greatest rise and their greatest fall. But that fall had not yet come. Before everything collapsed, Antony and Cleopatra believed they were unstoppable. They believed the world was theirs. They believed their enemies trembled before them. And for a time it was true. But fate is patient, history is sharp, and the world does not allow two suns to shine forever. The next chapter begins with power rising and the beginning of the cracks that would break it.
After Arsinoe's execution, Alexandria glowed with celebration. Not openly, not loudly, but through Cleopatra's satisfied smile and Antony's confident stride. To them, the removal of Arsinoe was not murder, it was a solution, a final cleaning of the past, a door closed forever. But the world outside the palace felt something very different. They felt the crack, a crack in the story Antony and Cleopatra were trying to tell, a crack in their harmony, a crack in their power. Because killing a princess inside a sacred sanctuary was not a small thing. It was not something people could forget. And though many feared Cleopatra and Antony, fear could not erase memories. Whispers began to move through the markets, the docks, the temples, the private homes. They broke holy law. They killed a girl under the goddess's protection. What kind of queen does this to her sister? Will the gods punish them? Will Rome? These were quiet whispers, but whispers have wings. Antony and Cleopatra continued their rule like nothing had changed. They held banquets that lasted until sunrise. They wore gold crowns shaped like the sun and moon. They sat on thrones in matching robes. They called themselves the rulers of the East. Cleopatra believed she had finally secured her world. Her enemies were either dead, exiled, or too weak to oppose her. Antony believed his destiny lay beside her, glowing bright like the rising sun. But destiny has a strange way of revealing itself, and cracks, once they appear, begin to grow. The first crack came from Rome. While Antony enjoyed Egypt's luxury, Rome was suffering. Famine, anger, political tension. And people there did not like hearing that their Roman leader was living like a pharaoh, drinking expensive wine and playing at being a king. Rome respected strength. Rome respected discipline. Rome respected sacrifice, and Antony seemed to have forgotten all three. Meanwhile, a new star was rising in Rome, Gaius Octavian, a quiet young man with sharp eyes and a mind colder than winter. He was Caesar's adopted son. He was 19 when Caesar died. People underestimated him. They shouldn't have. Octavian studied every move Antony made. He listened to every rumor about Cleopatra. He watched how Antony spent money, how he ruled, how he behaved like an Eastern monarch instead of a Roman general. And when the news of Arsinoe's execution reached Rome, Octavian smiled. Not because he liked death, but because he understood how powerful the story could be. A Roman general kills a helpless princess in a holy temple. He could use that. He could shape that. He could turn that into a weapon. And so, Octavian sharpened his words like knives. Back in Alexandria, Cleopatra celebrated her victory. She felt lighter than she had in years. She felt secure. But deep inside her, something else lived. Something she never talked about. Something that haunted her during the quietest moments. Fear. Fear that Rome might turn against her. Fear that her son, Caesarion, would never be accepted. Fear that Antony's love would not be enough to protect them. Fear that the gods had seen what she had done to her sister. When Cleopatra closed her eyes at night, she sometimes saw Arsinoe's face. Not angry, not screaming, just staring with wide, shocked eyes. Eyes that asked, why? But Cleopatra buried those thoughts. She told herself she had done what any ruler would do, any queen, any protector of her power. She had no choice. That was the story she repeated. But the gods and history are not so easily convinced. While Cleopatra fought her ghosts, Antony fought something far worse, his own reputation. Letters arrived from Rome. Advisors whispered warnings. Messengers delivered uneasy news. Octavian is saying you are weak. He is saying Cleopatra controls you. He is saying you are no longer Roman. He is saying you betrayed your people. Antony laughed at first. He thought it was all political noise. He thought Rome would never believe that a Roman general, he, Marcus Antonius, could be controlled by a foreign queen. But Antony underestimated Octavian, and he underestimated the power of a good story. Antony had always ruled with charisma. Octavian ruled with strategy. Antony led armies. Octavian led rumors. And rumors, unlike armies, cannot be stopped at the border. Then came the second crack. Antony began minting coins with Cleopatra's image beside his. This shocked Rome. Roman leaders could be lovers. They could be drunk. They could be sinful. But they could not share the face of Rome with a foreign queen, especially not a queen many Romans believed was dangerous, manipulative, and willing to kill her own sister. Coin iconography was political language. Coins carried messages. And the message Antony sent was one Octavian could twist. Antony serves Cleopatra. Antony lives like an Egyptian. Antony has abandoned Rome. Meanwhile,
Cleopatra minted coins of her own, strong, regal, majestic. She wanted the world to see her as Egypt's eternal queen, chosen by Isis, mother of Caesar's only son. But Arsinoe still existed in the corners of memory. Some old coins still carried Arsinoe's name. Some merchants still traded them. Some soldiers still remembered her as a symbol of resistance. When people held Cleopatra's coin in one hand and Arsinoe's in another, the contrast was sharp. Cleopatra, powerful, high status, standing beside Antony. Arsinoe, smaller, simpler, but untouched by guilt. And in politics, purity can be more powerful than gold. The third crack came from Antony himself. He changed. He became restless, short-tempered, uneasy, haunted. He drank more. He argued more. He slept less. Some nights he woke in a panic, sweating and shaking. Some nights he walked the palace halls alone. He told Cleopatra nothing, but there was something he could not forget. The moment Arsinoe looked at him before she died. She did not curse him. She did not scream. She simply stared, confused, betrayed. Antony could ignore Rome. He could ignore Octavian. He could ignore criticism. But he could not ignore the feeling that he, a Roman general with honor, had broken one of the oldest sacred rules in the world. Even soldiers whispered that the goddess Artemis would punish the violators. Some claimed to have bad dreams. Some claimed to see shadows near the sanctuary. Some claimed their weapons felt heavier since the day they shed holy blood. Antony dismissed the talk publicly. Privately, it tore him apart. The cracks grew deeper and deeper and deeper. But Antony and Cleopatra held the pieces together with one thing: ambition. They wanted an empire. They wanted glory. They wanted a future shaped by their own hands. And for a moment, it looked like they might achieve it. They gathered armies. They gathered ships. They gathered wealth. They gathered followers. But cracks do not disappear. They wait. They widen. They swallow everything built on top of them. And history was preparing to swallow Antony and Cleopatra whole. The next chapter begins with the final rise, the moment when they believed they could defeat the world. Soon, they would discover the world had other plans.
The cracks in Antony and Cleopatra's world were growing wider, even though they tried hard not to see them. They convinced themselves that power was enough to keep everything together, that armies and gold could silence rumors, that love could silence fear. They were wrong. Storms do not care about crowns, and the storm that came for them began quietly, like all great storms. It began with a message from Rome, a message carried across seas and deserts by a tired messenger who arrived breathless at Alexandria's palace gates. Antony read the letter. His hand tightened around the papyrus. His eyes darkened. Cleopatra watched him carefully. "What does Octavian say?" she asked. Antony looked up slowly. "He says," Antony replied, "that I have betrayed Rome, that I follow you, not Rome, that I have given Roman lands to an Egyptian queen and her son." Cleopatra's heartbeat stopped for a moment. "Lies." "Yes," Antony said,
but they are powerful lies. And then came the second message, not of words, but of action. Octavian had taken control of Rome completely. He now held the Senate, he held the legions, he held the people's loyalty. And he had made Antony and Cleopatra the villains in a story Rome wanted to believe. Rome needed to believe that someone was to blame for its troubles. Octavian gave them names: Antony, Cleopatra, the dangerous lovers from the east, the woman who killed her sister in a sacred temple, the Roman general who abandoned his homeland for her. It didn't matter that the story was shaped, twisted, exaggerated. It mattered that people listened. Because stories, once they take root in a nation, become stronger than swords. Antony tried to fight back. He wrote letters to Rome defending himself. He sent messages to senators, old allies, former friends. He told them Octavian was lying. Some believed him. Most didn't. Some were afraid to side with him. Others admired Octavian's order more than Antony's passion. But Antony still had one more thing, something Octavian feared: an army, a massive army, legions from Alexandria, cavalry from Syria, ships from Greece, archers from Judea, war elephants from Nubia. Antony and Cleopatra gathered them all, preparing for a final showdown. Cleopatra herself commanded ships. She stood on the deck with gold armor shining, her crown catching the light, her voice calm and strong. She wanted the world to see she was not weak, not a shadow behind Antony, not a frightened queen hiding behind palace walls. She was a ruler, and she would fight. The preparations went on for months. Armies marched, ships docked and were repaired, supplies were gathered, gold was melted into coins to pay soldiers. But with every passing day, the storm drew closer, and inside Antony's heart, fear grew like a shadow. He remembered the sanctuary at Ephesus. He remembered Arsinoe's last look. He remembered the soldiers breaking holy law. Was everything that followed a punishment? The nightmares grew worse. The uncertainty grew sharper. The cracks grew deeper. But Cleopatra pressed him forward. She told him, "You must not doubt. If you doubt, you lose. If you lose, we all die." Antony nodded. He knew she was right, but his spirit felt weaker than ever. Finally, the day came. The armies of Antony and Cleopatra marched to Greece, to the great bay of Actium. Their camp stretched across the coast like a small city, fires burning at night, soldiers training at dawn, ships lining the water like sharp silver blades. The sea was calm, too calm, as if it was waiting. Cleopatra stood beside Antony on a cliff overlooking the water. Her hair blew in the wind, her eyes steady. "Do you trust me?" she asked. Antony looked at her. He thought of how much he had given up for her: his marriage, his reputation, Rome's approval, his friends, his peace. He had lost almost everything, but he still had her. "Yes," he said at last, "I trust you." Cleopatra touched his hand. She said, "We win this together, or we fall together." Antony nodded, but the wind whispered something else, something darker. Together can also mean together in ruin. 3 days later, Octavian's forces arrived. His general, Agrippa, commanded the navy. He was brilliant, disciplined, cold, exact. Opposite him stood Antony, brave, strong, experienced, but exhausted in his soul. The sea between the two armies shimmered like steel. The sky was silent. The men were silent. Even the wind paused in the air, waiting for the clash. Cleopatra watched from her flagship, her royal standard raised high. Her ships were beautifully built, decorated with gold and colored sails, but they were heavy, too heavy. Antony's admirals warned him, "Cleopatra's ships cannot turn quickly, they will slow us down." But Antony shook his head, "Her fleet stays." No one dared to argue. Then came the moment history would remember. A horn sounded, a second horn answered. The sea exploded with movement. Rowers pulled their oars fast, slicing the water. War cries rose into the sky. Arrows flew through the air. Ships rammed into each other. The air filled with the sound of wood breaking, shields clashing, men shouting. Antony fought like a man possessed. His ship cut through the waves. His sword flashed. His armor shone red with dust and blood. But something was wrong. His ships were slow. His lines were breaking. His captains hesitated. His men were confused. And Cleopatra saw it. Her heart pounded in her chest. She felt the panic rise. She felt the fear she had buried for years. Breaking free. If they lost this battle, not only her kingdom, but her son, her legacy, her very name would be destroyed. She made a decision that would change everything. She turned her ship away from the battle and began to sail south. Some say she fled. Some say she believed Antony was dead. Some say she had planned an escape route. No one knows for certain. But what happened next shocked the world. Antony looked up. He saw her sails turning away. He saw her ship moving faster. He saw the queen, his queen, leaving the fight. And something inside him broke. The final crack. He lowered his sword. He left the battle. He jumped into a small boat. He chased Cleopatra's ship across the sea. His men watched in disbelief. Their commander had abandoned them. And with that single act, the battle was lost. The world shifted, and destiny took the stage. The storm had arrived. Antony and Cleopatra were no longer powerful rulers. They were fugitives, running not from armies, but from fate, from Rome, from Octavian, from the ghost of Arsinoe, from the choices that had brought them here, from themselves. And soon, the storm would swallow everything.
The world that Antony and Cleopatra had built, full of gold, armies, and dreams, collapsed faster than either of them imagined. Like a great statue smashed at its base, everything came down in pieces. And the first piece to fall was hope. After the Battle of Actium, Cleopatra's ships fled to Egypt. The sea was quiet, but inside Cleopatra a storm raged. Her heart hammered like a drum. Her mind spun with fear. She had always known this day might come. She had always felt the danger. She had always sensed that her enemies were waiting. But even she had not expected such a devastating defeat. Back in Alexandria, she locked herself inside her palace. She examined her treasures. She looked at the statues of her ancestors. She walked the halls of marble and gold where she had once walked proudly. Now every room felt heavy. Every shadow felt hostile. Every quiet space felt like a warning. Her advisors approached her cautiously. "We must prepare the city," they said. "We must ready the defenses. We must call on the gods." But Cleopatra barely heard them. For the first time in her life, she felt powerless. And she felt something else, something she didn't want to admit. She felt the weight of history pushing against her. Antony arrived days later, but he was not the Antony who had once ruled armies. He was not the warrior who had shaken nations. He was not the generals whose name had made kings kneel. This Antony was hollow, defeated, ashamed, silent. He did not speak for hours when he reached the palace. He walked into a dark room and sat alone. Cleopatra entered slowly. The air felt like it was made of glass. He did not look at her. "Why did you leave the battle?" he whispered. His voice was not angry. It was wounded. Cleopatra wanted to say she thought he had died. She wanted to say she acted on instinct. She wanted to say anything that would ease his pain. But the words froze in her throat. "I did not mean," she began. Antony raised his hand. "It is done." Those 3 words felt heavier than any army. Outside the palace, Alexandria prepared for war. But the people knew the truth. They had no chance. Octavian's army was moving across the Mediterranean like a shadow covering the sun. Cities surrendered before he even reached them. Kingdoms switched sides. Alliances broke apart. Everyone wanted to be on the winning side. And Antony and Cleopatra were no longer winners. They were symbols of a broken past. Even their allies whispered it now. Months passed. Alexandria starved. People grew restless. Soldiers deserted. Enemies marched closer. Antony tried to rally his troops. He stood before them with his old fire, shouting orders and promises. But his voice did not carry the same power. Too many defeats, too many mistakes, too many doubts. Even the most loyal began to lose faith. Cleopatra watched him from a distance. She had loved Antony more than she expected, more than she wanted. But now she saw a man drowning in regret, and she knew something he refused to admit. Rome would never forgive them. Rome wanted them dead. As Octavian's forces closed around Alexandria like a tightening noose, Cleopatra made her final plan, not to surrender, not to run, but to protect her children. She sent Caesarion, her son with Julius Caesar, and her younger children into hiding with trusted guardians. She hoped they would reach a land far beyond Rome's reach, a place where their bloodline could survive. It was the only hope she had left. Octavian entered Alexandria quietly, without celebration. His army took the city with little resistance. The streets where Cleopatra once rode in triumph were now filled with Roman soldiers. Antony heard that one of his generals had betrayed him and joined Octavian. He broke completely. Believing Cleopatra had been captured, or worse, killed, Antony acted in despair. He fell on his own sword. It was a soldier's death, but a tragic one. As he lay bleeding, news came. Cleopatra was alive. His heart cracked open with a pain deeper than a wound in his body. He begged to be taken to her. 2 loyal followers carried him to Cleopatra's hidden chamber. She opened the door, saw him dying, and screamed. They laid him in her arms. Antony looked up at her, his eyes soft. "I loved you," he whispered, "and I have ruined everything." Tears streamed down Cleopatra's face. "No," she said, "we ruined it together." Antony gave her a weak smile. "The gods forgive us." Then he breathed his last, and the world lost its brightest fighter. Now Cleopatra stood alone. Alone in her palace, alone in her war, alone in a world that wanted her erased. Octavian sent word that he wished to speak with her, not as a prisoner, but as a ruler who knew the value of symbols. If Cleopatra lived and was paraded in Rome, Octavian's victory would be complete. But Cleopatra knew exactly what that meant. Her ancestors had ruled Egypt for centuries. Her blood carried the weight of pharaohs. She was the daughter of a king. She was a queen in her own right. She would not be displayed like a prize. She would not be marched in chains. She would not let Rome define her story. And perhaps somewhere in her heart, she remembered Arsinoe, a princess dragged from a sanctuary, a princess stripped of dignity, a princess killed on someone else's terms. Cleopatra refused to die that way. She walked into her final chamber, the room where she kept her simplest treasures: a comb, a mirror, a small box carved with the image of Isis. Inside the box was a small, coiled asp, a symbol of the goddess, a symbol of royalty, a symbol of power. Cleopatra sat down on her soft couch. She held the snake gently. She whispered a prayer to the gods of Egypt. Then she pressed the asp to her skin. Its bite was sharp. The poison was swift. Cleopatra's breath slowed. Her eyes grew heavy. Her body relaxed. And in her final moments, she felt something she had not felt in a long time: peace. The queen who stood against Rome, the queen who fought for her throne, the queen who defied the world, was gone. Her servants arranged her body with royal dignity. Her crown was placed beside her. Her face was calm, almost serene. Her story had ended on her terms. When Octavian learned of her death, he was quiet. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply nodded. He had won. Egypt became a Roman province. Cleopatra's children were taken to Rome. Caesarion was killed. Rome never allowed rivals. And the memory of Arsinoe, Cleopatra, and Antony became stories told by those who survived them. Stories of ambition, of power, of love, of betrayal, of sacred sanctuary broken, of choices that shaped empires, of a family torn apart by crowns and destiny. History moved on, but the world never forgot them, because some stories burn too brightly to fade. Some rulers fall, but their shadows remain. And in the ruins of Ephesus, in the silent stones of the sanctuary of Artemis, the wind still whispers the names of those who sought protection there. One of those names is Arsinoe, a princess who died for a crown she never got to wear. A reminder that even in ancient times, power had a price paid in blood, a price paid in memory, a price never forgotten.